Our last presentation of the day is ArchivesSpace in a Preservation Workflow, presented by Tommy Keswick and Mariella Soprano of California Institute of Technology. California Institute of Technology is developing a preservation workflow for their digital collections that relies heavily on ArchivesSpace. For this presentation, Tommy and Mariella will walk through the choices that Caltech has made and still have to make regarding policies, collection processing, scanning, data modeling, digital file storage, and scripting. ArchivesSpace will be the center of this plan in that all collections must have a representation in ArchivesSpace to begin with. Identifiers stored in ArchivesSpace are the key to connecting records with digital file locations, and new records are created using the ArchivesSpace API during the automated processing. Presenters will also show the details of the automated processing wherein digital files are recognized as belonging to a collection in ArchivesSpace. Metadata about the collection and the archival objects are retrieved from ArchivesSpace. File metadata is generated for the digital files. Metadata and digital files are sent to storage in the cloud. Storage metadata is returned to the script. And finally, new digital object records with digital object components are created via the ArchivesSpace API that include information about where the digital files are located in the cloud. Tommy is the Digital Technologies Development Librarian at the Caltech Library. He worked closely with the Caltech archives on their digital projects, which include getting collections online with Islandora, participating in planning infrastructure needs for digital preservation, and contributing to other aspects of the archive's web presence. Mariella is Senior Collections and Special Projects Archivist at Caltech. She's been playing a key role in the adoption and implementation of both ArchivesSpace and Islandora, and the continuing development and customization and integration of both platforms. So Tommy and Mariella, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Jessica. This is Mariella, and as you were saying, I'm Senior Collections and Special Projects Archivist at Caltech Archives, and Tommy is Digital Technologies Development Librarian at the Caltech Library. So, and we will talk about ArchivesSpace in a preservation workflow. So we will be talking about the high-level decisions that we have been making, the technical decisions that have followed. Then we will cover the automation components of the workflow. We will conclude our presentation discussing our future plans, and at the end we will leave time for questions and answers. And as Jessica said, we will definitely do not want to go over our allocated time so that you can all enjoy the fun trivia game. Tommy, next slide, please. The COVID-19 work from home generated several challenges, particularly related to the services that we could offer to our patrons. As everybody else, we were closed at the time, completely closed, and in fact, we are still closed to patrons. We decided that in order to fulfill requests to access material that could not be viewed in person, we would try to digitize the documents which had been requested. We then decided that it would make sense to preserve those digitized files and not to discard them, and that we would automate the preservation process. This would apply if the requested documents would represent a reasonable portion of individual folders within analog collections. Therefore, we decided that we digitize entire folders if the number of pages requested were more than 1 or 2 in each folder. Next slide, please. In order to accomplish this, it became clear that folders to be digitized needed to be part of collections that had been already processed and a resource already present in our ArchivesSpace repository. The file names connected to these digital files had to be consistent and predictable for the automation to take place, and each component of those file names would be easy to be parsed and be basically understood by archivists. Basically, the final goal is to preserve these digitized portions of collections and automatically send them to the storage system using ArchivesSpace as the database that contains the information about these digital files and their locations. Now I will hand it over to Tommy, who will talk about the technical aspects and future plans.
Thanks, Mariella. So we had to come up with some decisions after we had those broader goals in place about how we would approach this. And so one of the first things we had to think about was, what is the archivist entered information in ArchivesSpace, what types of information and where we were going to put it. So like, what were the minimal fields we needed filled out? Like, we know we needed a collection ID, and we usually needed a box in a folder, like a top container for items, or component unique identifiers for those items. And we also wanted at least some names and titles and labels, along with any other descriptive metadata for a collection that we wanted. But those things that I mentioned are basically the minimal amount that would make this work. And then we also had to think about, what is the data we wanted to end up in ArchivesSpace at the end of it all, and where in ArchivesSpace. And so in terms of how ArchivesSpace is set up, we figured that utilizing digital objects and digital object components to store information about preserved copies of files that are attached to archival object records makes the most sense for us. And so we wanted to figure out how we could write, if it didn't exist, we needed to write component unique identifiers to archival objects, and we needed to create some of these digital objects and digital object components along with the data that would sit in some of those components. We also wanted to think about where we were going to end up storing our digital files. And so we had to think about what formats and locations and how much this was all going to cost us. And so ultimately, I think we're going to go with a losslessly compressed JPEG 2000 format for cost savings, because we can get them to be about 60% of a TIFF size, because we're going to store them up online on Amazon S3 Glacier Deep Archive, as well as a local LTO tape copy. The Amazon pricing is going to work out for us to be about $1 a terabyte a month if we keep it in the deep archive, because we don't ever need to access it really. These are like backup preservation files. So it's reasonably affordable, and it'll save us money by using the JPEG 2000. And so some of the considerations for when we started to develop the actual automation components are, we wanted to make it as easy as possible for the archivists to initiate this process. And so my idea around that would have been, is actually to keep it as a single data input for starting the process. And that's going to be the collection ID. As long as an archivist knows the collection ID and all the other things have been set up in place, like the file naming and the collection in ArchivesSpace, that is all they need to initiate a process of starting to preserve folders that have been digitized. We also wanted to predict the points of failure that could happen while the script is running. So like, if there's network problems, we want to anticipate that. If there's checksum mismatches in some parts of the script, we need to make sure that that's going to be handled robustly, that kind of thing. And then we also wanted to confirm the success, like to make sure the records were actually written, and to make some validation of all these checksums that we're passing around for files and everything like that. So what we need to make this happen in a script is, first of all, the identifier in a resource record is one of the key components here. We use the first slot of the four space identifier field. That's where we put our identifiers. Then we also need the archival objects within that collection to have either a component unique identifier here, or we'll calculate that based on a top container record that also has a child, because basically it's built on the collection box and folder. That's how we have it for our manuscript collections. And so that can be calculated either from the instance, or it can be entered manually when the collection is being put together. So on the file system for these digital files that have been scanned, we have a setup like this, where we have a folder that is named for the collection. And then within that folder or directory, we have folders for each archival object. And so our archival objects represent a folder of files, because we don't have description for every individual page in our folders. There are TIFFs in the subdirectories that are scanned underneath all of that. And then so the actual automation process is like kind of complicated, but I've tried to narrow it down here. So what happens first is that we query the ArchivesSpace API to get the collection data based on the ID. Then we save a record of that in JSON format on S3. Then we loop through all the folders that are underneath that collection on the file system. And then as we go through each one, we get the archival object data from ArchivesSpace. Then we create or validate an existing digital object in ArchivesSpace for this folder level that matches the archival object. We save a metadata record, and then we loop through every TIFF and convert it to our preferred format, and then we save that converted file to S3. We validate the checksum for that file based on the original TIFF and the converted one and the Amazon version, that they send back a checksum of what they got. And then once we know all that's good, we save a new digital object component record to ArchivesSpace that houses all the information about the file that has been sent to Amazon. So let me go through some screenshots of ArchivesSpace to show you how this kind of conceptually works together. We're first starting at a resource record for a collection. This is the George Ellery Hale papers. We can see one of the archival objects within that collection looks like so. It's got a component unique identifier. And then if we scroll down to the instances part, we can see there's a digital object attached to this archival object. If we click through to that digital object, we then see that this is a digital object. We use the digital object to also point to our Islandora instance. And so this gives us in the public interface, the thumbnail and the link. But now we've created new digital object components underneath this digital object record that represent every page that's been scanned. And so the digital object component record is created by the script. And then we use the file versions section of the component to list all the information about the scanned file that's been sent to S3, including a URL that it's available at. It's a private bucket, so nobody can actually get to it. We give format information about how we chose to encode these files. We've got a file size. We've got a checksum that matches something that Amazon is storing. We also give we use the caption field to name the width and the height just for human readable records. We talk about what it's for, and then we have a record of what's on Amazon at that point. Quickly, let me talk about our future plans. We want to develop, right now it starts from a script on the command line, and I'd like to make a little web form for archivists to push a button to start this. I've already started this. I think it'll actually work really well for the archivist. So they can just go to a form, enter the ID, and go. We also need to vary the script a little bit because we have different types of collections besides manuscript collections. We've got like an image collection where every item is described, so that's going to be a little bit different. We might want to expose some of our unprocessed collections if they start to get digitized. And so that's going to take some figuring out with IDs. Also, born digital collections have a lot more thinking to go for how to deal with them. And then we need to automate the process of recording LTO tape information in ArchivesSpace. Also, we want to reuse a lot of the script to actually publish collections and folders on Islandora and any follow-up to Islandora that we start to use. And I think we can do that based on how we've calculated looping through these file structures and stuff like that. Okay, so that was a lot. Here's a picture of a 100-year-old photo of a wind tunnel. And so I don't want to feel like a windbag here. And I hope you enjoyed this.
Thank you, Tommy and Mariella. That was great. And it was a lot. If you have any questions, feel free to type those into the chat now, and you have included your email addresses, so that's great. I'll keep pausing for some time for some, see if any questions come through in the Q&A. All right. Have you run into any issues when box and folder numbers change?
I'll take a stab at this one. Because this is kind of a nascent project, we haven't run into that yet, but it's kind of on our mind, and it also involves what I mentioned in our future plans. We want to kind of think about this process in terms of unprocessed collections too, because those don't have boxes and folders yet. We've talked a lot about that, how we could potentially make this work. And I think it could work because the box and folder number that we use in the file naming is really just to ensure uniqueness and to know what that file is. We really could use any unique identifier after the collection number, and it even could be temporary. All it has to do is connect the ArchivesSpace record to a file on disk at that time of the script running. So it could change in the future. Once we have the record of where something's stored for the preservation system, it'll be fine. The records are connected, and it doesn't matter what the file names are at that point.
Thanks. In addition to using digital object records for metadata storage, do the digital files also have public-facing digital object records for patron access?
I'm trying to read this question. Let me go find it in the.
Oh, sorry, I moved it.
That's okay. You marked it closed. Yeah, so the digital object records for metadata. So we do have public-facing digital object records for those collections that have been finalized, and that was the last bullet point on my future plans one. We want to automate the publication of these digitized collections to Islandora, which is what we use for access. And so when we do that, I can go back in my slides to show you a little bit. It's kind of hidden in there. So this is our digital object record. You can see here when we use the file version on the digital object, not the component, this is actually pointing to a collection that is up on Islandora. And so like this is the link that appears in the public interface, and this is the thumbnail. And so for collections that we have made sure everything's looking good in Islandora that we pushed over there, we do have those records available, and they show up in the public interface. I think that answers your question.
Thanks. All right, we still have a couple minutes. So
I realize I talked really fast going through it because I had the time wrong about when I was supposed to end for questions. So I was 5 minutes early in terms of my thoughts. Yeah, so if anybody has any other questions, because I went a little bit fast, feel free.
Tommy, we wanted to give time for the trivia, right?
that's true, yeah. Mariella was very worried we wouldn't have enough time for trivia, so we
I was feeling the pressure, so
I think she did for trivia.
Don't have to.
That's totally fine. And since there are no other questions in the chat, so we will go ahead and get started with trivia if everyone's ready. But thank you so much to Mariella and Tommy, 2 more online forum veterans presenting again this year. So I look forward to next year's presentation from the 2 of you. And if anyone has any additional questions, or if you think of any questions for Mariella or Tommy, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A later. And if they're sticking around for trivia, they can type those questions into the chat or answer those questions.
Thanks everyone for having us.